Hi, this is Ms. Vanoy, and I'm going to talk today about the ICE writing strategy. This is like digging a little bit deeper into the ToSEEC, and you know how the ToSEEC is your topic, sentence, you've got to show evidence, explain, evidence, explain. The ICE is the part that kind of comes in between the topic sentence and then where you actually give evidence. Because sometimes I found that students need to kind of remember this strategy because they're not really citing exactly where they're getting their information from. So we want to make sure that you are giving credit where credit's due. Let me go to the PowerPoint. Basically, I wanted you to, of course, the strategy, the acronym for it does spell out the word ICE, but I also wanted you to think of it like visually as when you are icing a piece of writing, you are doing something in a very structured format. There is no way around it. You've got to make sure that you introduce, which means tell where you got your information from. You've got to cite that evidence. You've got to either give a direct quotation or a paraphrase, and you have to be able to explain that in your own words, because then what's the point in your writing? They would just read the original piece of writing, the original thing that you researched. So you want to add a little something else to it. Again, in other words, this I strategy is you got to set up who told you the information, what is the information, and what does that information actually mean? Here's another visual with ICE. This one talks more about just the quotations, introduce, cite, and explain. And to be honest, that's the one we'll probably practice the most in middle school. You'll use this whether it is in your ToSEEC short answers, ERQs, or if it's when you're writing an actual paper or essay. This is the reason why I felt like it was important to go over the ICE strategy and not just leave it with just the ToSEEC. And again, that ICE goes right in between, is where I'm talking about. It goes right with ToSEEC. Is you never want to leave a quotation or evidence alone. I find that by middle school, students really do know how to use the quotation marks and to go back to the text and find exact supporting evidence. They even are pretty good, definitely by 7th grade, 6th grade, they're still practicing. They're still good at picking out the right piece of evidence. But what I start to see in middle school is you start to just throw that evidence out there like it's an island all to its own, and you haven't, then the reader has all these questions. They're like, why, where did this quotation come from? What does it mean? Why is this important? You're leaving the reader with too many questions. You don't just put a quotation in alone. You never want to leave your reader hanging. So here's an example of how we've introduced, we have like a topic sentence and then we have evidence, but we've not gave any kind of introduction where we know where that evidence came from. Police aren't the only people who can arrest someone who is breaking the law. Then we just have a straight up quotation. When people hunt without a license, go over their legal limit of fish or speed, a law enforcement conservation officer can arrest them. He or she has full police powers, period, quotation mark, the end. This is incorrect because you have not told me who said this. You've not cited your evidence. You didn't tell me what page number it was on. You didn't tell me who said it. You didn't tell me where the article it came from. You didn't explain it in your own words. So the best this paragraph has is you do have a cite. You did do the C part of ICE, but you need to make sure that you have the explain and that you have properly grammatically introduced it. So that introduction is all about a signal word. Signal words tell us where you find that information, who told you that information. The most common one used that I would tell you to number one in your writer's toolbox, and eventually you can use more sophisticated ways to introduce or attribute who's actually giving you the information. But in the very beginning, I would make sure that I had stored in my toolbox as the number one way is according to. That always seems to be one that's really easy to kind of remember and really helps you as a writer focus so that you make sure that you've told where you got that quote from. So for instance, on this one, that long quotation about when people hunt, they can also be, they still have police powers. If they break the law, other people can help them, enforcement officers. It says, according to Dr. Sassafras of the Department of Natural Resources. Now, this is an excellent citation because not only does it tell us who told us, who said it, which was Dr. Sassafras, but it also gives us an idea of why Dr. Sassafras is a source that we should listen to. Hey, he is the Department of Natural Resources. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about people who hunt or fish illegally. He knows about the police powers they have. Examples of signal words, like I said, according to is a great one to make sure you have in your toolbox. Say words like explain, suggest, observe, and you're going to notice some of my kids who love to write that all of these explanatory words, introductory words, however you want to say it, this introduction, all of these are coming before the cite. To me, when we're first learning it, ICE, introduce, cite, explain, it just makes sense that the introduce would be the first part of the sentence. You could write it differently, though. You could do a quotation and then kind of explain where that came from. But I just think for right now, when we are going to give evidence, we want to make sure that we introduce it, we tell where it came from, then we cite, then we explain. You don't want to get the I and the C mixed, even though you can eventually switch that up. You don't want to right now. All right, so the introduce is that signal word that makes it clear, and it also kind of gives us a little background to tell us it's a good source. For instance, Robin Hood, author of How I Take from the Rich and Give to the Poor, points out that he was doing the shire a favor. Now, there's not a direct quotation here. It's a paraphrase. He points out that he was doing the shire a favor, but he still said it. So we have to make sure that we told that when we quoted this in our article that Robin Hood was the person who said that, even though it's a paraphrase. And since we introduced it by saying Robin Hood, then we told why he's good enough to even quote. Author of How I Take from the Rich and Give to the Poor. We've told the book that he's wrote and why this might apply to what our thesis or topic sentence may be. Like if you're just like randomly quoting like my Uncle Billy or something, you need to make sure that you tell us, well, Uncle Billy's important because of whatever he ties into to your research. You don't want to just like randomly this would be the worst if you said like on Facebook I read. Well, that's not a good source. That tells us right away that just because somebody randomly said it on Facebook doesn't mean that that's the facts. Let me find it. The second one is got a direct quotation, Robin Hood's mortal enemy, the sheriff of Nottingham. So we told who this quote came from. He is nothing but a thieving Saxon scoundrel. We told who it came from, and then we told why it's important that we would want to know what the mortal enemy of Robin Hood would say. So these are some examples I highlighted in yellow. Now we want to think about cite. The main thing I want to go over here is to make sure that you have properly grammatically done this. Notice I have it in the yellow. There is a comma before the quotation. There's a capital letter at the beginning of the quotation mark. For the most part, you all are going to start by copying the whole sentence that you got the quotation from. Sometimes you'll see in writing that they don't have a capital letter there, and that's because they took it from the middle of the sentence. But for all intents and purposes on how we first learn it, I want you to think of it as you took a full sentence to quote, and you would always want to capitalize that. Notice that the quotation mark goes at the very end of what was actually said, and then there is this page number. Well, you should know that 15, it indicates to the reader that it was found on page 15. So you put parentheses, the page number it was found, parentheses, and then notice that the period goes after that. Now we can get into the grammatical rules and all that, and I could drill you on it, or I could just say this is the way it is and just learn it. Just look at good models, notice it when you read. You always put the period after the parentheses. That's the best way to learn it, is just to notice it within the writing and to practice it yourself. What should be cited? You want to cite anything that's quoted word for word. Duh. That one's a pretty easy one. That's the one that we're going to talk about the most. Anything that's paraphrased where you took somebody else's words and you put them in your own words, but it was really what they said. You want to make sure if you talk about something that was in a table, a graph, a chart, an image that was in an article, you want to make sure that you cite, okay, I got this observation from this image that I looked at. If anybody was like, you're having an interview with somebody and direct words were said to you and that you are quoting them, you want to make sure, even though it wasn't written down on a page number, that you did cite the source who said it. Here's those quotation mark rules that I was talking about. Always put quotation marks directly around those quoted words. Don't put them around the introduction words now. Unless they actually said it, that's what you put it around, only what they actually say. For instance, I've got this example, according to Bob Ross. So I use the introductory word of according, that transition word, Bob Ross, so we know who we're talking about. He's, according to Bob Ross, beat the devil out of it. If there wasn't a page number, you would just put the period right after that, the last word, and then the quotation mark. For the most part, things that you're going to cite in middle school, they're going to be from some sort of research. That's what we'll mainly be practicing to make sure you get that skill down before high school. According to Bob Ross, beat the devil out of it, came from page 24, put the parentheses around it, and then a period. It's really important that you remember that you've got to capitalize certain things, that and that don't do that common mistake of putting quotation marks all the way around the sentence. Only put quotation marks on the words that were actually quoted. Let me see. All right, now when you do the explain part, this is very similar to what we've talked about with ToSEEC. This is the part where you put it in your own words. Now, again, there are more sophisticated ways to do the explain part. You're going to see in mentor text and different things like that, you're going to see that you don't always have to use these transitions of this shows or this proves. And I'll be honest, I mean, that does make it seem a little bit more middle school or elementary. In high school, they'll want to break that habit from you. But there's nothing wrong right now with practicing it that way to help your brain get focused on this writing skill. So you're going to start out by introducing it somehow according to, citing the actual evidence, and then you're going to want to say something like this shows, and then say it again in your own words and connect it back to whatever your topic was or your thesis. Again, here are some text frames. Note, these are basic, but it's a great place to get started. Everybody's got to get started somewhere. This shows, this means, in other words, this proves, that kind of thing. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with this, and I hope that you see when you put them all together, that the paragraph is going to be in that ice cube, very structured, introduce, cite, and then explain. Very similar to what we've learned with ToSEEC. This shouldn't be anything brand new, but it's something probably in middle school that's something you haven't seen before middle school, where you actually have to cite the actual words, and you have to put quotation marks around that, and then you have to make sure you put the page number that you found it from. That's what gets you to that proficient distinguished answer. All right, I hope this helps, and I'll be back with some other strategy soon, I'm sure. Thanks, bye.